So philosophy is all about the rational evaluation of the evidential bases for our fundamental beliefs, our fundamental ways of conceptualizing the world, our fundamental values. Then arguments are the tool by which philosophers engage in that activity. They are the way in which philosophers develop reasons, present reasons, and critique the reasons that other people offer. And so the first two concepts that our authors introduce here are the notion of an argument and the notion of logic. And I'm going to expand upon what they say in the article a little bit, adding a little more context, a little more detail to hopefully paint a slightly clearer picture of what they're talking about in their discussion of arguments and of logic. So they begin on page 9 by telling us that logic is just a way of articulating more clearly the reasoning that we ordinarily do when we tell someone why we believe something. So logic is a way of crafting reasons. And the product of logic, the things that get crafted, are arguments. And they tell us that an argument is a series of statements where the last statement supposedly follows from or is supported by the first statement. The last statement is called the conclusion, and the first statements are called the premises. So an argument is a presentation of reasons and the thing for which they are evidence. Let's look at that notion a little bit more, at a little bit more fine-grained level. So when I think about arguments, when philosophers or logicians or mathematicians think about arguments, we think about arguments in a way that's sort of different from the way people normally think about arguments. So oftentimes when people think about arguments, they think about something like this, right? You suck. No, you suck. From a philosopher's perspective, from a logician's perspective, this isn't an argument. It's a verbal dispute. It's a disagreement. It's a bunch of name calling. It's a bit of rhetoric, but it's not an argument. Arguments for philosophers are very different things. So what is it that philosophers think of when they think of arguments? Well, I would suggest that if you had to characterize how philosophers, logicians, mathematicians understand arguments, I would say that arguments are artifacts. Now, when I say that, you might think artifacts, Indiana Jones. Does that mean they're old? No one cares about them? Not at all. What I mean when I talk about arguments being artifacts is expressed by our good friend here, Bertrand Russell. Right? When I say an argument is an artifact, what I mean is that an argument is a tool. It's a bit of human artifice. It's a human creation. And like all tools, arguments are created for very specific sorts of purposes. And in fact, as we'll see, human beings have been creating arguments and even developing sciences, creating sciences to study how best to make and use arguments for literally thousands of years. So what is an argument? Well, Perry and his co-authors give us a basic understanding of the nature of an argument. An argument is a set of statements, a collection of statements, so there's more than one statement, and that collection has a structure to it. The structure is a relationship between evidence and conclusion, between reasons and the things that those reasons are supposed to make more likely or definitely true. Before we go into the nature of arguments too deeply, let's take a step back and think about why it is that there are sciences about arguments, why there's statistics, probability theory, why there's formal logic, why it is that human beings have devoted so much time to this particular bit of human artifice, to this particular set of tools. They've devoted at least as much time as they've devoted to computer science, to the scientific study of how to create better, more efficient, more powerful computing devices. So arguments must be pretty useful, pretty powerful tools. So let's take a look at some of the ways in which arguments help us out as human beings. So I'm going to suggest that arguments have four important functions, four really central uses. To start with, arguments allow you to present your thinking to someone else. They allow you to give them a coherent presentation of the reasons you have for a particular belief or a value or a way that you conceptualize the world. But it's a very special presentation. It's a presentation that's designed to persuade, that's designed to show why they should see your reasons as good reasons, why they should see your belief as a good belief, a well-evinced belief. And so the second use of arguments is to persuade others, to get other people to adopt your beliefs, your values, to conceptualize the world in the way that you do, because they now see the benefit of that belief, of that value, of that conceptualization. Arguments also serve an important function in that they preserve a line of thought. So they allow people to encode the way that they have been thinking about the world, about a particular way that they conceptualize the world, a particular belief they have, a particular value, and preserve that so that future generations or other individuals who weren't there at the time can now see, have insight into the reasons why they thought of the world this way, they valued this, and so on. And finally, by encoding our inferences in the form of arguments, of these structured collections of statements, we are then given a potential ability to analyze and refine those arguments, to look at the reasons and decide whether or not the reasons are adequate or inadequate, whether or not we can improve our arguments, our reasons, or whether or not we should in fact consider alternatives to the view that we have. And this particularly, this last function, is crucial and important and probably the most recent of the benefits that we get from argumentation. In the next lecture module, we'll go and look at each of these benefits one can derive from good argumentation in a little more detail.